Reading from The Breathless, Dark Ripples, Part 1. Chapter 1, Strange Days. Living alone means no witnesses, and he's certainly better off that way. Greg Lestrade is 13 and a half years old the first time it happens. He's playing with his neighbor Alex Odell, kicking a football back and forth in the scrubby vacant lot at the back end of his street. Suddenly, he starts gasping for air, inexplicably unable to get a full breath. He kicks the ball long and wide, sending Alex scrambling off after it, and it's as if the cold spring sunlight is being sucked away along with the dwindling oxygen. Greg's vision darkens and wrinkles queasily around the edges. Everything seems to switch to slow motion, and another image becomes visible atop the fast-fading sight of his friends retreating back. Greg sees an infant, tiny and pale, surely less than 6 months old. He can hear voices. There are 2 women sitting nearby, chatting over tea. The women don't see when the baby gets hold of something he shouldn't, but within seconds he has begun to choke. They haven't noticed, Greg thinks. Why haven't they noticed? Desperately, he tries to say something, do something, and in the next moment, his perspective changes. He's seeing the unfamiliar room as if from the older woman's eyes. And in his panic, he pushes. He doesn't know what he does, really. The woman turns her head and sees the baby's predicament at last, lunging to clear its airway and save it. Greg's vision clears. Air rushes into his lungs as if he surfaced from a deep swimming pool, and he bends double, coughing and panting as his friend jogs back to him with the retrieved ball. He doesn't say anything to Alex about it. It happened so fast, it made no sense. Within an hour or so, he's practically forgotten about it. The next morning, while Greg is getting ready for school, he notices just one silver hair. It tucks down behind his ear, hardly perceptible in his longish brown mop, and he leaves it alone for a whole week, taken with the novelty of it. But he's not even 14. The next weekend, he plucks it out using his older sister Corey's tweezers and doesn't think of it again. The second time it happens, Greg's a week shy of his 16th birthday. This time, he sees a toddler with dark, curly hair. He knows deep down that it's the same boy he'd seen as an infant, but he doesn't understand how he knows it. He doesn't understand any of it, though, so that aspect hardly seems worth worrying over. Afterwards, Greg shuts himself in his bedroom. Mom and Corey are speculating loudly downstairs over whether it had been an asthma attack or whether allergies run in the family. He's shaken by the strange, surreal memory of the 2 boys running in the wild back gardens with their rolling, uneven tussocks of hills. The little one straying out of sight and too near the stream, running high from recent rains. The panicked, instinctive jolt of finding the older boy and pushing to get his attention where it needed to be. What did I do? It happens again, and again, and again, as the dark-haired little boy gets older and more precocious. Always the same boy, always the intense shortness of breath, and the strange, dark double vision that reminds Greg of the time his science teacher demonstrated polarized glass. And always a single silver hair the next day, sometimes more than one if Greg has had to make a real effort. By the time Greg reaches age 18, he's uncomfortably aware of the many, many ways a determined young child can endanger its own life. Surely this boy gets into more trouble than the average. From the little Greg has been able to glean, he's got a highly intelligent sort of curiosity. Nevertheless, Greg makes a shaken vow that he will never have children of his own if he can help it. He's taken to spending time in the library, sitting in an isolated area of the stacks while he studies CPR, first aid, history, all sorts of religions. He's begun to give a lot of thought to what he is and why he is. Is there a name for it? Is there historical evidence of anything like it, or even a legend? And if there were a record of someone else having these ripples, he has to call them something. Would it be as anything other than the transcribed ravings of a committed madman? He meets with his local vicar and asks Alex to help him set up with a meeting with his priest at his Catholic church a few streets over, too. 2 careful, nervous conversations later, with questions couched in vague double talk and answers that leave him even more confused, his mom seems to think he's making plans for seminary. Greg resolves to drop that line of research then and there. Instead, he distracts Mom with the announcement that he wants to be a policeman, wants to move to London and join up with the Met. He's been dreaming of the opportunity to help more people in the real world, whom he can touch and talk to. He wants to be able to do good deeds that he can actually speak about. Just as he'd hoped, Mom latches onto this idea with great enthusiasm, and Greg's tentative foray into theology is shortly replaced around the family dinner table with his talk of his bright future in law enforcement. Greg is fast approaching 20, and he calculates that his charge is approximately 6 years old. The boy is called Sherlock, apparently, a strange sort of name to hear shouted in one's mind by various people nearby. He's not sure if it's a sign of proof that the ripples are real, or just evidence that his overactive imagination is completely ridiculous. It seems as if Sherlock's heedless tendencies have been somewhat curtailed by his beginning school, though. Greg has managed to get through his police training without major incident. Only once during that period had he found himself caught in a ripple with people around. It had happened during a 5-kilometer run. He juddered to a halt, and his assessment officer had told him afterwards that he'd stared into space, panting and unresponsive, for nearly a minute. He'd managed to convince the man that he was simply feeling the effects of a chest cold he was having trouble shaking. It had been a near thing, but the excuse had worked, and at least nobody had suspected him of a propensity towards seizures. These days, Greg is much more careful. Now he's a junior constable, relegated to foot patrol for parking violations, as he works his way through the required 2 years probationary service. He keeps himself in a perpetual state of readiness while on duty, eyes sharp and roving for details. Knowing that at any moment he might lose touch with his surroundings, he has good reason to step carefully and cross streets quickly. When he enters any new area, he automatically scans it, watching out for where he could escape to be alone, where he could lean against a wall and wait out a ripple. He's found that with concentration, he can keep control of himself for a handful of seconds now, when the darkness starts rushing in. It's generally enough to let him duck into a quiet space, thinking, "What is that idiot child up to now?" as he begins to gasp for air. He isn't surprised that Sherlock is, so far, safest while at school, so he does his best to schedule his working shifts on weekdays, in mornings. On his days off, he keeps to himself at first, still getting comfortable with life in the tiny flat he's renting. Now and then, Sherlock takes it into his full head to climb along the roof ridge of a weekend, or search a nearby field for specimens of poisonous snakes. And Greg handles these incidents without undue concern for his appearance in the real world. Living alone means no witnesses, and he's certainly better off that way.